Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Growing more with less is the mantra of Nebraska's corn farmers, and they're using incredible technology to do it. Soil moisture monitors let them know when their crop needs water and how much. GPS systems eliminate overlaps in the field, saving fuel and money. New hybrids reduce the use of pesticides and increase yields. When you're talking new technology and innovation, Nebraska corn farmers are all ears. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Scott Brown talks about the price outlook for cattle markets. Greg Ibach discusses the potential for Nebraska beef exports to China. Dave Aiken explains a court decision dealing with Syngenta corn varieties, and Bob Wright gives insect scouting tips for corn and soybeans. University of Missouri Extension ag economist Scott Brown is our cattle market analyst this week. The four largest beef exporters in the world are India, Brazil, Australia, and the United States. Three of those countries are or have been dealing with supply issues. Australia has faced smaller herds due to drought. Its exports this year are projected to be 25% lower than when it led the global beef trade in 2015. The current leader is India, but it'll reportedly ban the slaughter of water buffalo, the primary source of its meat shipments. And Brazil is, among other things, facing food safety concerns. Last week, the U.S. suspended imports of Brazilian fresh beef after rejecting 11% of that country's products since March. Meanwhile, the American herd is plentiful and foreign sales are up. Through the first 4 months of 2017, U.S. beef exports were 20% higher than the same time frame a year ago. We talked with Scott Tuesday afternoon about these international events and their impacts on U.S. trade, but we started by looking at recent movements in live and feeder cattle markets.
Well, I think when you look at where cattle prices have gone the last few weeks, a lot of that can be traced back to where we've seen boxed beef prices. Box beef prices have fallen for both choice and select box beef prices the last few weeks, and they've certainly fallen much faster than the slow rise we got as we entered 2017. And I think that has a lot to do with where cattle prices are going. And although we got a little strength early this week, we're already starting to see some weakness today. So I think we could be seeing lower cattle prices as we move ahead here for the next few weeks. Is this dip substantial enough to stop producers from pulling animals forward? Well, I do think we can potentially see some folks deciding to hold on to cattle a little longer before they go to slaughter. My concern about that is if we quit pulling forward like we have been of late and slaughter weights start to go up, we really exacerbate the problem of very large beef supplies coming in the latter half here of 2017. You know, we're already talking about beef production being up and record red meat production, by the way, in May of this year. You add weight to what's already larger slaughter numbers, and I think that certainly keeps a lot of pressure on cattle prices for the remainder of this year. Latest Cattle on Feed report showed May placements up 12% from the previous year. Is that surprising or no? I don't think that's really surprising. When you look at the pre-report estimates, the midpoint of that would have put placements up 10%, so a little higher than the midpoint of the average. I'll say when you look at we were getting rid of calves, the last calves that might have been on wheat pasture. I also think we saw some calves coming from Mexico that helped push placements higher as well. And really, I think we saw a lot of cattle that penciled in the black for the first time in a long time that made feed yards decide now's the time to go ahead and fill those pens. So we're seeing a lot of things happening internationally right now among the top four producers. Set aside the U.S. and its potential beef trade with China, but Brazil and India and Australia are all going through their separate issues. How is it impacting the global landscape? Yeah, so I think in some ways it gives the United States some opportunities. When you look at India to start with, I'll say where we've been talking about potential bans to slaughter of cattle, although not a very direct competitor to the United States, a #1 market in terms of exports of product at over 2 million metric tons in some years. If that market were completely to go away, I think that provides the U.S. some opportunity to either get in higher valued markets that others are going to trade down to some of the markets that perhaps that Indian product was filling in the past. You know, Australia trying to recover from the drought, and I think we see much better pasture conditions there than we've seen for a while, but it takes a period of time before we're going to see a large amount of product moving from Australia. And of course, with what's going on in Brazil, with us banning imports of Brazilian beef due to some issues that we see there, as well as just the overall issues that we see with one of the large meat packers based out of Brazil, it kind of leaves in question where the Brazilians go as we look ahead as well. Again, an opportunity for the United States.
Well, I guess I should ask about the opportunity in China as we learn that Sonny Perdue will be there later this week to have the first American beef in about 13 or 14 years. How big of a deal is this?
So I think I take it in 2 steps. You know, #1, in the short term, I don't think we should expect large movements in U.S. cattle prices as a result of that Chinese market opening. We're likely going to get some lower valued products that will move into China from the United States. But for me, the key is longer term. When you look at an economy that's 1.2, 1.3 billion people with economic growth in excess of 5% a year, it tells me we have a subset of consumers who are going to be demanding higher quality beef. And I think the United States seems well positioned to take some of that market as we move forward. And when I look, Jeff, you know, ahead, for me, the growth in consumption is going to occur outside the United States, and a country like China, I think, is going to be critical. So keeping that market open and seeing it develop over time, I think spells a real positive for U.S. cattle producers.
We'll get something abnormal in July. That's an inventory report. Scott, what are you looking for from it?
Yeah, so I think given where we started 2017, we frankly haven't given strong signals to the cow-calf side of this industry to begin to slow. So although we don't have a point of comparison relative to 2016 since we didn't do a report in July of 2016, I think we're going to continue to see at least some positive in terms of beef cow numbers. I hope that rate of growth has been slowing. When you look at beef cow slaughter, we have been up for the year. However, when I look at the bred heifer side of the equation, it seems like to me there's still a lot of demand for bred heifers in the cattle industry. I expect we'll be up in terms of beef cows relative to what we think we had in 2016. And frankly, all the way to January of 2018, I think we're going to be talking about still more beef cows. And until we start to see lower prices, we're going to continue to see producers not really liquidating herds.
Well, finally, what is your price forecast here?
Well, I think there's certainly a lot more downside risk in these markets than upside potential. If you look how long it took us to really get back to fed cattle prices here for a minute of what were $1.45, you know, no one thought we were going to talk about those kind of cattle prices in early 2017, and we've slid back down pretty quickly to maybe perhaps get below $1.20 here before long. I think as we go through the remainder of 2017, if we grow cattle weights and we continue to see cattle slaughter running at the rates that we have, we're going to continue to see some of that downside risk from just supply pressures on the market. And it's going to take a very substantial increase in U.S. beef exports, I think, to really offset what I see as more downside risks than upside potential at this point.
Next week, Elaine Cubb will join us to recap the USDA's reports on planted acreage and grain stocks. Nebraska Department of Ag Director Greg Ibach is in China this week, joining U.S. Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue and U.S. Ambassador to China Terry Branstad as American beef returns to the world's most populous country. After banning it in December 2003, China announced earlier this year it would again bring in product with certain restrictions. In mid-June, Nebraska officials joined Greater Omaha Packing to load the first boxes of beef headed to China. Nebraska is the largest beef exporting state in the country. It accounted for 18% of the U.S. total in 2016, ahead of Texas in second and Kansas in third. Greg joined us last Friday to discuss several trade topics, including prospects in Canada, Mexico, and Japan. But we started by asking for an update of the outlook in China at that time.
Well, as of today, we are reading in Chinese newspapers or news-related articles that the first shipments of beef have cleared customs in China, and we're excited about that, of course. And we've actually had quite a bit of activity in our offices, as well as hearing from packers that are approved, because there's only 4 and 3 of them are Nebraska companies as of today, that a lot of interest in U.S. beef as well.
What are the guidelines for shipping into the country?
So those are, we're still learning more about them, but it appears that they have specified that they want naturally occurring levels of hormones and probably aren't interested in ractopamine being a feed additive. And so those make it similar to what the EU takes. And what I'm hearing is that the packers that are considering shipments or making shipments are sending them the same beef that's qualified for the European Union right now.
So how important is that market with in mind those guidelines?
Well, those guidelines, I think there'll still be a lot of beef available. Hopefully, as we test the market and understand those import protocols and the testing protocols that China is going to implement, and understand, what flexibility or what the parameters for those tests are, that maybe more beef, or people can send a wider variety of shipments into China. And of course, it needs to be traceable as well, and so that's important. But I think we have a lot of beef that's qualified. And we're anticipating, if we would capture the same market share that we have in average around the world, it could be a $200 million market for Nebraska alone.
The governor announced this week that he'll lead a trade mission to Canada in August. Why is Canada an important market for Nebraska?
Well, Canada is an important market because they're our neighbor. They're our 4th largest ag importer. They're our #1 overall export market. And so that definitely shows that there's activity even outside of agriculture. And many times we've focused on something over the sea, and we haven't necessarily reached out to the customers right next door to us. The governor a few weeks ago with the Corn Board hosted a Mexican delegation, and we're reaching out to Canada.
And further then in September, there will be a trade mission to Japan. What will that include?
So Japan's in conjunction with the Midwest Japan Conference. Next year, or the next conference will be hosted by Nebraska, which will be the 50th anniversary of that conference, so we're looking forward to that. And so this will be an extension of that, and we're going to take advantage, while the governor's already over there attending that conference, to be able to do some agricultural export promotion activities, beef and pork for sure, and probably also look at some of the other byproducts, corn, wheat, soybeans that go over there as well. And then we'll also promote the investment that Japan is making in Nebraska with different companies.
When it comes to Japan, they were a member of TPP, as was the U.S. Now that that looks like it's dead, can you talk about the future of trade there and maybe potential trade deals?
Well, and even going back to the outreach we've had between Mexico and Canada. And that's to assure them that even though there are discussions underway with NAFTA, we want them to know that agriculture values them as a trading partner. And so that's part of the reason we're accentuating that as well. There's different news stories out there that USDA, USTR, and Commerce are in discussions with Japan about maybe a bilateral agreement that would broaden especially some of the ag trade options. And some weeks there's a story out that says it's imminent, and the next week the story says maybe not so soon. But I think that's all part of, we want to be there as a state. We want to have our producers represented. We want to be asking for their business, so when the opportunities do emerge or they expand, that our companies are able to take advantage of them.
For further background on U.S. beef trade with China, you can view our interview with Mississippi State Extension livestock economist Josh Maples from the May 19th episode of Market Journal. A federal jury in Kansas last week awarded nearly $218 million to corn growers who said Syngenta's commercialization of a new trait caused them economic losses. Plaintiffs in the class action lawsuit said the introduction of the new varieties led to China rejecting shipments of U.S. corn in 2013 and pushed prices for the commodity lower. Nebraska Extension Ag and Water Law Specialist Dave Aiken joined us Thursday morning to recap the case and explained how it could affect farmers across the country.
Well, this had to do when some Syngenta varieties that had not been approved in China, even though they'd been approved in the U.S., China had accepted corn shipments for a while despite the non-approval, but then in 2013 they started rejecting U.S. corn shipments because it might have some of these unapproved varieties in there.
So how does this Kansas case fit into the picture?
Well, this is the first of what could be, dozens of lawsuits in the courts, as they have these trials around the country where the jury basically found that Syngenta had misled their customers, and this was a result in the damages, and the farmers suing Syngenta got every penny that they asked for in their complaint.
Yeah, explain what the jury did here.
They decided that Syngenta was misleading their customers, and that this had the impact on corn prices, and that the jury did not obviously approve of what Syngenta had done, and so they awarded the farmers everything that they asked for. And this is just unprecedented. This never happens in a trial. The trial lawyer's worst nightmare is, did I ask for enough? Did I ask for enough? These guys are kicking themselves. We should ask for more, because they probably would have gotten it. But it's a pretty remarkable outcome, and the farmers and the lawyers suing Syngenta have to be very pleased because this is, this first jury trial couldn't have gone any better for them, and so they're going to maybe do a couple more and then see where they go from there.
Yeah, tell me what happens next.
Well, the next trial is scheduled for Minnesota, and it could be July. It could get pushed back to August. Who knows? But so they'll see, and the Kansas trial took 2 weeks, so that one shouldn't take much longer than that. And so we'll see what that jury does. At the same time, Syngenta is going to appeal these damages to the Federal Appeals Court. That will take months. We'll be into next year before we know about that, probably. So this is the beginning of the process, but it's the beginning of something that still looks like a very long-term process.
What does this all mean for Nebraska corn farmers?
Well, we have a state class for Nebraska corn producers set up, and they're just going to, the lawyers in charge of the Nebraska class are just going to kind of wait and see, if there's, if the Minnesota jury reacts the same way that the Kansas jury did, and if those damage amounts are upheld on appeal, then Syngenta is going to say, okay, the trend is pretty clear. Let's enter into settlement negotiations. But the Minnesota jury could say, oh, they weren't so bad. They didn't. There are other things that caused the price to go down. So we really just but this is a first step and kind of a key step.
Can you tell me, in this Kansas lawsuit, how large the payments could be per farm, and why that is the case, or why it is the way it is?
Yes, it looks like it will be between $15,000 and $18,000 per farm. Now, I tried to find out, how many acres, how many bushels, to try to break that down more precisely, and I couldn't. So that's what it would be, kind of on a farm basis, which is very broad. But that's after the lawyers get paid, and the lawyers would get between 40 to 50% of the recovery on this. And the reason for that is because they have a contingent fee arrangement, which means, if I'm representing you and we win the case, then, I get 40%. But if we lose, you don't have to pay me anything. And that's the deal that these farmers had on this case.
Dave says the litigation could go on for a while with no guarantee it'll be wrapped up by 2018. The July Nebraska farmer says this year, Nebraska Extension cropping systems educator Nathan Mueller and his dad Larry tested planting populations on 15-inch row soybeans through the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network. This month's issue says over the last 10 years, data from the network has shown soybean growers can cut back on planting populations without hurting yields. However, as Nathan notes, most of those trials have been with 30-inch rows. You can read about the Mueller's work with 15-inch row spacings in the July Nebraska Farmer. The shape of Nebraska's corn and soybean crops has slipped, according to the USDA's latest progress report. The percentage of the state's corn in good to excellent condition dropped 4 points from a week ago, while soybeans lost 2 points from those categories. Nebraska Extension entomologist Bob Wright says there are several insects growers can now be scouting for. Bob joined us Wednesday in Clay Center, Nebraska, where Nebraska Extension held a weed management and cover crops field day.
Well, one thing we're starting to see in parts of the state is small grasshoppers on field borders. Some areas have relatively high numbers, and the concern is once those field borders or pastures nearby start drying down, and the grasshoppers will start moving into crops, and as they get bigger they feed more, and they're also harder to kill. So it's a good thing now to check your field borders or nearby pastures, and if you have a lot of grasshoppers, maybe consider treating them while they're outside of the field before they get inside the field.
Are all grasshoppers a problem?
No, there's only a few species that really get into crops a lot. There's a lot of species that prefer to stay in rangeland and pasture areas, but there's 4 species in one genus that typically we find in crops.
What is the treatment threshold?
It's a rough idea, and it's really hard to do, but we want you to estimate how many grasshoppers in the field border or in the field are within a square yard. And obviously as you approach them, they start hopping away, so you sort of have to estimate ahead of you. But if you have 20 to 40 grasshoppers in the field border, that's something to be concerned about, and maybe treat while they're outside of the field.
And corn and soybeans both?
No, it's a lower level in corn and soybeans. We have an article in Crop Watch that has all the details with that. The one issue with insecticides that is a little complicated is ideally you want to treat the field border and the crop, but there's relatively few insecticides that have labels for both situations. There's a few pyrethroids, Mustang and Asana do have both non-crop and crop labels. So if you wanted to treat both the field border and the crop, be sure the insecticide you use is labeled for both of those areas.
You had also mentioned in Crop Watch recently that Japanese beetle is starting to appear. Is it in higher numbers than usual?
Oh, it's hard to tell. It's possible because we had a mild winter and we probably had pretty good overwinter survival of the white grubs, the larval stage in the soil. That's where they overwinter. They've been expanding their range the last several years. They're can be found in pockets all throughout the Platte River Valley. They started off in Lincoln and Omaha in town areas, and now they're starting to move out into agricultural areas. They have a very broad host range. If in your backyard, they can feed on roses, crab apples. They like linden trees, a lot of flowering plants, but they also will feed on corn and soybeans.
Is there a reason for that movement outward?
Oh, just that they're looking for new pastures or new...
Diversifying.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me about the identification.
Okay, it's about a ½ inch long beetle, has a metallic green back behind the head, and that's basically the only insect you'll find. Usually you'll find them in groups. They feed in groups, usually in aggregations. In corn, once we start having silking, they can feed on the silks and interfere with pollination if they're abundant enough. In soybeans, they're mostly feeding on the leaves, and if they're abundant enough, they can cause yield loss.
Are these also insects that appear first in the field border and then move into the field after that?
Right. So when you do scout, you want to look at the field border. That's probably where you see them first. If they're not throughout the whole field, it may not pay to treat the whole field. If you wait too long, they will go out through the whole field. But I guess don't be too concerned if you have high numbers on the field border. They may not be out through the whole field.
Now with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension ag climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast, and we had an active pattern across portions of the state during the midweek period. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, seen thunderstorm development. A couple waves moving in from the western panhandle across the state on Tuesday brought a pretty significant severe weather outbreak with some localized heavy precipitation in the I-80 corridor between Grand Island and Lincoln. And then on Wednesday night, we've seen the heavy thunderstorm activity from north central Kansas through northern Missouri. Some of that breached up into south central Nebraska, a very small portion of south central Nebraska. And then we've seen the general thunderstorm development on Thursday. So overall, we missed out on many of the precipitation chances across northern Nebraska, and that is an area that has been persistently dry and has seen the worst of the conditions. So if we go to the current drought monitor, what we will notice is that a lot of Nebraska has been filled in with abnormally dry conditions, and we would expect some easing of the drought across south central and portions of the I-80 corridor. But more importantly, I expect we're going to see some of the moderate drought conditions start to be pulled southward unless we see some unusually heavy precipitation with the system coming through Sunday night and Monday. And right now the forecasts keep most of the heavy moisture to the south of this region. So as we look at the current upper air pattern, we have a troughing pattern over the Great Lakes, slight ridging over the Rocky Mountains, and a little bit of a wave that is going to start to move our way as we go through the weekend. So at the surface, we have high pressure firmly in control of our region. A very nice day today. It's going to be a little bit humid, but most of the precipitation will be well to our east. Now as we get into tomorrow, that wave starts to make a little bit of inroads toward the central Rockies, and that's going to start to form a surface low in the Texas Panhandle, Oklahoma Panhandle region, start to bring up moisture late in the day to our region, so we'll see most of the moisture to the south, but some of it's starting to show up in returns across north central Nebraska. But more importantly, this wave starts to open up and move across our region as we go into Monday. Surface low moves a little bit farther toward the east, and that opens the Gulf up and brings some pretty significant moisture into at least the eastern half of the state. And we see convective outbreak once again expected for northeast Kansas and portions of eastern Nebraska. By the time we get to Tuesday, the wave starts to move toward the east of us, and most of the precipitation associated with those waves should end in southeast Nebraska before we get to the noon hour on the 4th, leaving a fairly nice day during the second half. So here's that precipitation starting to slide to our east. Then on Wednesday, high pressure starts to build in, and this is going to bring some very strong heat to our region, looking at least surface lows developing to the south of us, but with the atmosphere capped, it really isn't going to do any good. The moisture, it's just going to bring the moisture up and increase humidity levels, creating a high index day for cattle stress across the western half of the state. On Thursday, this high pressure system builds eastward with all the moisture to our south and surface lows pumping up additional low-level moisture. We're looking at a very sticky day, highs in the mid-90s or higher, and cattle stress indexes in the 110 to 120 range across most of the eastern two-thirds of the state. Kind of backs this high pressure system up a little bit on Friday, so we might get a slight cool down, but high pressure will be firmly in control, and it won't be till the week until we get into more of a northwest flow and have additional chances for moisture in our region. As we look out into the future, 8 to 14 day forecast next Thursday, the following Tuesday, well above normal temperatures, indeed indicating more cattle stress potential as we get into the 13th and 14th. And in terms of precipitation, with high pressure firmly in control, we're probably looking at drier than normal pattern.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews are available individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on cattle prices, Nebraska ag trade, a Syngenta lawsuit in Kansas, and scouting fields for insects. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week by following us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Next week, Elaine Cubb will be our corn and soybean market analyst. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.